So it finally happened. The entire world now knows who Peter Parker is. Will our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man be able to swing his way out of this? Let's see. And that's why today in Flick Summary, Spider-Man: No Way Home. This long-awaited film begins right where Far From Home left off. Mysterio dies, but just before he does, he releases a video where he blames Spider-Man for his death and reveals that the man behind the spider suit is none other than Peter Parker himself, releasing a picture of the young high schooler.
What the language?
As you may have expected, this sends the entire city into absolute mayhem and go as far as accusing Spidey of murdering Mysterio. All the while, Spider-Man is having a little bit of a panic attack himself, especially when he spots thousands of strangers mobbing MJ, his girlfriend, in case you forgot. Upon seeing this, Parker slings from his webs from building to building until he finally gets to her and rescues her from the madness, as he should. Before he can get away from the audience, Peter gets bombarded with all sorts of questions and accusations, mostly about always leaving chaos wherever he goes. He finally flees the crowds as J. Jonah Jameson, a news reporter, announces poor Spidey is the #1 public enemy of the city. Well, that's not too great for your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, is it? Unfortunately for Peter, no matter how hard he tries to get away from the press, they manage to catch up to him with helicopters, cars, bikes, basically any other means of transportation that doesn't include web slinging. In hopes of getting away from the mob, Peter has the brilliant idea of heading over to his very own house, without realizing that the press was still following, and well, now they have his address. Once he gets to his place, Aunt May and Happy are having a little bit of an uncomfortable moment, if you will. She is trying to break up with not so Happy, but Peter is quick to interrupt. Well, more like Spider-Man makes quite an entrance with his girlfriend as Happy and Aunt May decide to briefly halt their conversation. Peter then alerts them of what's going on, but before he can even get a word out, the news are already openly broadcasting Spider-Man's real identity and countless helicopters are swarming Peter's place. I guess it wasn't that much of a good idea to send the press directly where you live, huh? As the family watches the news, James Jonah Jameson continues his incessant strikes on poor Peter. But this time around, he doesn't have any mercy and decides to include his friend Ned and his girlfriend MJ as accomplices to the apparent murder. Of course, it isn't just a media frenzy, as you might have guessed. When someone who dies blames you for their death, it's a little sketchy. So naturally, the FBI arrives to their door next, claiming that they're in search of Peter Parker. They proceed to take Peter into custody along with Ned, MJ, and Aunt May as the feds ask all sorts of questions about Spidey's involvements with basically any event that has gone on. MJ, Peter, and Aunt May appeal to their Miranda rights and do not say a word unless they speak to a lawyer. On the other hand, Ned accidentally confesses to being accessory and accomplice to Peter, potentially incriminating himself in the process.
I literally helped him find the Vulture.
So in Spider-Man's illegal vigilantism, you were his main accomplice.
Side note, I totally relate to Ned in this scene, but it only gets worse from here on. The Fed wants to send Aunt May to prison for child neglect. Why? Not sure, but that's a little too far. Once they get released from custody, Peter, Happy, and Aunt May meet with a very special lawyer, one that is extremely talented, if you will. His name? Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil. He's trying to help Spidey get out of this mess he didn't even ask for. Matt tells Peter that the charges they have against them will not proceed, but of course, not everything is rainbows and butterflies. Happy is under investigation due to some missing technology from Stark Industries. Matt advises Happy to find himself a really good lawyer, and then this happens.
How did you just do that? I'm a really good lawyer.
Chills. Literal chills. Later, now that everyone knows exactly where Peter lives, they decide to stay at Happy's bachelor pad for the time being in hopes to find themselves a bit of safe haven. At night, MJ and Peter have a FaceTime call and they discuss their future and where they might be headed to college, more specifically, their dream university, MIT. The next morning, press is absolutely swarming Peter's school and waiting for his arrival. There, he is greeted by his teachers and principal who assure him that his school will be a safe place for him, except for his PE teacher, who believes that he is responsible for Mysterio's death. As expected, MJ, Ned, and Peter are harassed by a swarm of people at school, no matter if they were fans or haters of Spidey. Trying to get away from the mob, Peter takes MJ to the school's roof with Ned quickly following suit. The trio talk about their hopes and dreams once they get to MIT together, discussing how they hope to live together during their college life. A few days later, Peter receives his first college letter, holding the answer to whether or not he got accepted. Unfortunately for him, his 3 backup universities have regretfully declined his college submission. Big ouch. To make matters worse, the same goes for MJ and Ned, who have also received a rejection letter. Having said that, hope remains alive for their MIT acceptance letter. Once they get the letter from MIT, the trio of friends nervously get together to open them, expecting to spend their future together. And the verdict is They didn't get in. Due to the recent controversy that has surrounded the three, Peter is overwhelmed with feelings of guilt and decides to take it upon his hand to try to solve the mess he has created. Or, well, the mess that Mysterio has created. Our boy Peter decides to head on over to the Sanctum Sanctorum, where Doctor Strange and the other wizards reside. There, Peter anxiously asks him if there was anything he could do to help his friends get into college. To be more upfront, he was asking Doctor Strange if he could make it so as if Mysterio never revealed his identity. Strange tells him that he doesn't have the Time Stone anymore, but he could cast a spell to make everyone forget he was Spider-Man. Upon hearing this, Wong warns Strange not to do it as there could be dangerous consequences. Stephen replies by telling Wong that they've used it for a lot less.
Do you remember the full moon party at Comertage? Oh, exactly.
Of course, Strange and Pete agree to go through with the spell anyway, despite the dangers it may entail. Right, because getting into MIT matters much more than the fate of not only one universe, but multiple of them. Strange then starts getting his wizardry done and warns Peter that everyone who knows about his secret identity will forget that he is Spider-Man. At first, Peter seems to be okay with it, but then interrupts the entirety of the wizardry 5 times just to tell him to adjust the spell and have the people that knew who he was prior to Mysterio's ordeal still be aware of the fact that he's Spider-Man. Peter's constant interruptions cause the spell to get out of hand and force Strange to contain it to avoid something catastrophic from happening. In a subsequent conversation, Peter confesses to Strange that he didn't think about arguing his case to the admissions department at MIT, which infuriates Strange to the point of kicking Peter out of the Sanctum Sanctorum.
Are you telling me that you didn't even think to plead your case with them first before you asked me to brainwash the entire world?
Well, I mean, when you put it like that, then...
Peter then hurries to find an admission officer he can talk to. Fortunately for him, he's able to intercept the vice principal of MIT, who is heading to the airport. But as they get to talk, she reinstates that the university made the right decision. As they discuss the future, or lack thereof, at MIT, Peter spots quite a number of people screaming and running while the cars seem to flip through. As it turns out, we find out that Otto Octavius, otherwise known as Dr. Octopus, is the evil mastermind behind this attack on cars? Wait, Dr. Octopus? You don't belong in this universe. Peter then drops the conversation with the vice principal and quickly changes into a Spider-Man suit in an attempt to minimize the absolute mayhem Octopus is causing. Once Spidey and Otto are face to face with one another, Doc Ock seems to recognize him despite them never actually meeting.
Hello, Peter.
As you might have guessed, Peter and Dr. Octopus engage in a fight and the MIT vice principal seems to be in a lot more danger than everyone else. Finally, Doc Ock corners Peter and gets ready to kill him as Spidey strips his suit away and shows his identity. Upon seeing Peter's face, Otto is completely stunned and confused over his appearance given that he is only familiar with the other Spider-Man's face.
You're not Peter Parker.
Thankfully, Spider-Man is able to subdue Doc Ock using Stark nanotechnology and even played around for a little with his tentacles. Now, back to business. Peter saves the vice principal, who is absolutely marveled over his heroic acts and promises she will do her best to give him a second chance. You go, Peter. Peter doesn't get to celebrate for too long though, as a smoke bomb from none other than Green Goblin appears right in the middle of the street. Wow, misfortune really does follow Peter around, doesn't it? Just before he fights the Goblin, Peter and Doc Ock are teleported to the Sanctum Sanctorum's basement. Once there, we also find Dr. Connors, who belongs to the other universe. Kind of confusing, isn't it? Strange once again shows up and explains to Peter what exactly is happening. You see, since Peter made Strange mess up the spell, other visitors from different universes that knew who Spider-Man was prior to Mysterio's reveal are now entering their universe, confirming the multiverse we all knew existed. He then proceeds to give him more good news. He has to catch all the visitors that crossed to his universe and send them back home. Peter decides to call in for backup and brings MJ and Ned to the Sanctum Sanctorum. Once there, Ned claims to have some sort of connection to magic, but Strange just shushes him. I mean, listen, I found it ridiculous too, but wait until you see what happens next. They get together to brainstorm some sort of plan to find where all the entities might be hiding as Peter explains that there's some green elf that's running loose somewhere. Surprisingly enough, Doc Ock knows exactly who that elf is, telling the group that it's impossible that he's here, seeing as Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, died quite a few years ago. Strange then enchants Peter's gauntlet with the same magic he used to teleport Otto and himself back to Sanctum Sanctorum. Spider-Man then heads to the woods, this time wearing his suit inside out, and runs into Electro, another bad guy from another universe. He attempts to send him to the Sanctum Sanctorum's basement, but is unsuccessful. Worst of all, he managed to upset Electro, who is now shooting lightning at Spider-Man. Right then and there, we encounter Sandman, who, as you know, belongs to the same universe as Doc Ock and the Green Goblin. Sandman recognizes the spider suit and wants to help Peter take down Electro. Peter tells him he is indeed Peter Parker, but not the one Sandman is familiar with. Eventually, Electro gets his body back and is teleported back to the Sanctum Sanctorum, along with Sandman and, well, a tree. We then cut back to Norman Osborn, who is listening to Green Goblin's voice as he frantically attempts to mute it out. The Green Goblin insists that Norman is a coward since he won't work up the guts to fight Peter Parker, which leads him to break the Goblin mask and promptly walk away from it. Later, Peter receives a call from Aunt May, who is naively chatting away with Norman, the same man that wants to destroy Peter. Norman decides to play the victim card with Aunt May and explains that he has lost his home, can't find his son, and has a teeny tiny voice in his head that sometimes commands him to do things he doesn't actually want to do. Peter suggests taking him to Sanctum Sanctorum, but Aunt May refuses and asks him to have a little heart. Either way, our boy takes Norman to their safe place over at Strange's place and leads him to the basement where Ned and MJ are. Otto recognizes Norman and is shocked to see him alive and well, but Sandman interjects, explaining that both Doc Ock and Norman died when fighting Spider-Man. Strange arrives and tells each and every one that he is trapped, that he will send them back to their universe, but Peter doesn't want to, seeing as that means certain death for some of them. Dr. Strange shushes him and continues performing the spell, but Spidey stops him, taking away the cube he was using to contain more multiverse villains and cast his magic. Strange brings him back, and a little bit of back and forth chase begins to take place in the mirror dimension. Ultimately, Peter gets the cube back and leaves Strange helpless and tied up using nothing but math.
Hey, Strange! You know what's cooler than magic? Math!
Spidey returns to the Sanctum Sanctorum and has a trade offer for the bad guys he has caught so far, telling them that he will devise a plan in an effort to keep them all alive. He then gives MJ the cube that Strange was using and tells her that he will call in case something goes south and instructs her to keep it if worse comes to worse, and he has to send everyone to their universe. Then Peter takes everyone he has caught and Dr. Connors to Happy's apartment, where he shows them a machine that can help them create antidotes to cure them from their superpowers and overall insanity. How nice. With Norman's help, Peter creates a chip that helps Doc Ock control his evil tentacles, as they are the ones that actually possess Otto, and gives Electro an artifact that drains out the electricity. Just as things seem to be going the right way, Peter's spider sense starts tingling, making him realize that something is wrong. Very wrong. He figures out that Norman was actually just planning some evil scheme, and the Goblin's voice takes over as he confesses that he doesn't have pure intentions at all. Electro steals Iron Man's arc reactor and now has more power than ever. Convinced that he doesn't have to give up his power, him, the Goblin, and Peter get into a fight. Doc Ock tries to help but is quickly thrown out of the building by Electro. Sandman goes his own way, and Lizard breaks free from the feast fan where he was at. All the while, James Jonah Jameson is getting this on camera and recording every little thing he can catch from outside Happy's apartment. The Green Goblin completely overtakes Spider-Man and kicks his butt over and over, dragging him down to the floor where Aunt May is. May injects him with the antidote, but it doesn't work to subdue him, taking this as his opportunity to injure May with his glider. But of course, that isn't enough for Norman, who decides to shoot one of his bombs in an attempt of causing even more damage than one already caused. Peter tries to stop it, but he is far too late, and the bomb explodes. He then hurries to check on Aunt May, who at first seems to be okay, and even gets to tell Peter that he did a good job by trying to help Norman and the rest, stating that,
"And with great power, there must also come great responsibility."
Unfortunately, May seems to be bleeding out, and, well, as heartbroken as we may be, Aunt May passes on as Peter desperately weeps. Happy witnesses everything from his car as the Fed arrives to the crime scene and attempt to take Peter away, going as far as shooting him in the arm. Thankfully, your heartbroken neighborhood Spider-Man manages to get away. As this is happening, MJ and Ned are freaking out as they can't seem to get a hold of Peter. But in a complete turn of events, Ned accidentally uses his magic powers and opens a portal to a direct vision of Spider-Man. I mean, Strange must have felt pretty stupid when he found out about it, as he had to spend months to even begin to understand magic. And Ned? Well, he just did it by accident. Spidey crosses the portal and nonchalantly enters, but it's not who they think it is. Okay, so excuse me while I scream. Even when Peter is in his full Spider-Man suit, MJ and Ned demand evidence to prove that he is actually Spider-Man.
Why'd you do that?
I was trying to see if you have the tingle thing.
I have the tingle thing, just not for bread.
Well, he is. Let's leave it at that. Ned decides to try one more time to see if he can find the Peter Parker they're familiar with, but once again, no such luck. Instead, we get the ever-charming Tobey Maguire stepping out of the portal and visibly showing us the audience how time has passed. Look at that! He's already an adult. Tobey's Peter is confused when he sees someone else wearing the Spidey suit, so they engage in a little web throwing that quickly ends as Andrew and Tobey start getting to know each other. MJ and Ned beg for their help to find the other Peter, but they can only think of the secret hideaways they used to clear their head. Of course, it's insanely tall buildings. What else would it be? MJ realizes that that is exactly where her Peter is, and along with 2 brand new Peter Parkers and Ned, they set off to find him. They finally manage to find Peter completely devastated and broken over the loss of Aunt May as he tells his friends what went down. MJ and Ned then proceed to introduce Peter to Peter and Peter, and tells him that they might be able to help him a little better. However, this universe Peter is instantly defensive, but Andrew and Tobey calm him down as they explain that they know exactly what he's been through. Tobey lost his Uncle Ben, and while Andrew lost his girlfriend Gwen, Peter then says that he needs to find the Green Goblin and kill him, but the other Peter stops him, telling him that it will only lead him to become bitter and will only make matters worse. Tom's Peter comes to his senses and joins Tobey and Andrew in the lab where they get to making antidotes to once again try to cure the villains and give them another chance in their universes. As they do their laboratory things, Tobey explains that in his universe he managed to win MJ's love, and although it was complicated, they made it work. Andrew, on the other hand, remains single since he lost Gwen many years ago. Oh, and Ned finds out that Tobey Spider-Man's best friend Harry died in his arms after trying to kill him, which of course freaks him out.
Do you have a best friend too?
I did. He died in my arms after he tried to kill me. It was heartbreaking.
Once the antidotes are ready, Tom and Andrew Spider-Man get their web shooters while Tobey just flicks out some web out of his wrists, completely shocking his counterparts. Tom's Peter then releases a video telling the bad guys he did try to help them even though he could have killed them at any given moment, and that now is waiting for them at the Statue of Liberty. James Jonah Jameson, who is broadcasting Peter's message, accurately says,
"The Statue of Liberty? Good God, folks! He's about to destroy another national landmark."
And hey, he's not wrong. While they wait, Tobey and Andrew take this opportunity to discuss a little more about their personal life and complain about their back pains. I can only wonder why.
My back!
Of course, Andrew offers Tobey to crack his back, which he gladly accepts. And I mean, this is just pure gold. Almost immediately after, Electro gets to where Peter is and gets ready to fight. The Spider-Man on their end are getting ready too, but as the fight starts with Sandman and Lizard joining as well, our Spidey boys lose the first round. All 3 Peters get together to devise a plan, but Tobey and Andrew confess they're not used to working as a team. Of course, Tom's Peter takes this opportunity to reveal that he knows how to work with other people given that he was part of the Avengers.
I was in the Avengers.
The Avengers?
Yeah.
That's great!
Thank you.
What is that?
Anyway, Peter decides to coordinate them a little more and tells them to follow his lead. Also in hopes of avoiding confusion, they name each other Peter number 1, who is obviously Tom Holland, Peter number 2, Tobey Maguire, and Peter number 3, Andrew Garfield. Now, ready to get back to the fight, Andrew's Peter says,
I love you guys. Thank you.
Awkward. Right after that, Peter 1, 2, and 3 swing together until they land on a surface ready to fight Sandman, Electro, and Lizard. I'm telling you, this has got to be the best crossover ever since the Power Rangers met the Ninja Turtles. Anyway, this time around, all 3 Spider-Men actually manage to coordinate themselves rather well and are able to defeat Sandman. They continue on with the fight and focus on Electro, but he's far too powerful to be stopped. Doc Ock makes an appearance and catches Peter 2 and Peter 3 with his tentacles. But just as you begin to think Otto has gone back to being bad, plot twist! He was just faking being on Electro's side so he could make him lower his guard and use the device designed to drain his energy, right after removing Iron Man's arc reactor from him. All the while, Peter number 3 has injected Dr. Connors with the antidote and quickly strips him from his powers and madness. Right then and there, Strange detangled himself from the webs Peter number 1 tied him in and shows up to the Statue of Liberty.
Been dangling over the Grand Canyon for 12 hours.
Later, each of the Peters have a bit of a bonding time with their universe villain, as Peter number 2 shares a moment with Doc Ock, and Peter number 3 reveals his identity to Electro, who realizes he's only been fighting a kid, as Andrew hints at the possibility of a black Spider-Man hanging about somewhere in the multiverse.
There's gotta be a black Spider-Man somewhere out there.
Miles Morales, where are you? The Spider-Man villain bonding time is cut short when the Green Goblin arrives a little late to the party. placing a bomb in the cube and opening up their universe to more and more foreigners. As the bomb sets off, MJ falls from a lethal height, but Peter number 3 is able to catch her just in time, in the same fashion that he caught Gwen right before she died. I'm sorry. I just need to cry for a minute, all right? Okay, listen. This scene was so heartbreaking that it had me and most of the theater like this. As this is happening, thousands of people from other universes start arriving as Strange attempts to stop them. Peter number 1 then has his opportunity to set his vendetta on Norman, with a blinding rage consuming him as he beats him to a pulp, nearly killing him. He is stopped by Peter 2 as he tells him that this is not going to bring May back. Tom's Peter stops, but unfortunately Green Goblin has the audacity to stab Toby's Peter in the back. And oh my god, my heart just stopped for a full second when I saw this scene. Peter 3 then throws the antidote over to Peter 1 and actually manages to cure Norman and revert him back to his good self, leaving us with the inquiry, what happened to Toby's Peter? Well...
You okay? Yeah, I'm good. I've been stabbed before. Oh, God.
However, reality is still shifting all around and everything looks fairly apocalyptic. The sky starts to break and we get a glance at some villain silhouettes such as Superior Spider-Man, Scorpion, Kraven, Rhino, among others. I mean, I could be wrong, and maybe these are not the villains I mentioned, but I guess the point is, I cannot be the only one who at this point wanted them all to come through to fight Peter, right? Anyway, Peter decides to sacrifice himself and asks Strange to cast a spell for him one last time, this time around making everyone forget he even exists and not only having people forget he was even Spider-Man. This would of course avoid more villains to come to Tom's universe and cause more mayhem. Strange agrees and decides to cast the spell while Peter goes to say goodbye to her friends and the other Spider-Men. We then see Toby and Andrew's Peters returning to their universe, and Tom's Peter telling Ned and MJ they are not going to remember him, but promises that he will do his best to find them. Doctor Strange finally finishes performing the spell and everything returns to how it was, except for the teeny tiny detail that no one remembers Peter Parker, and no one knows who Spider-Man is. Sometime later, Peter pays a visit to MJ, who is hanging out with Ned at work as he prepares a little speech to tell his former girlfriend to try to get her to remember him. However, when he sees just how happy she's looking, he decides to just order a cup of coffee as he strikes a casual, everyday conversation until he finally leaves the coffee shop. Later, Peter decides to visit Aunt May's grave where he runs into Happy, who is unable to recognize him despite acknowledging that he met May through Spidey. Peter rents out a lonely apartment and begins crafting a suit, preparing himself for the lonely adventure that awaits him. The end. Oh wait, we still need to talk about the post-credit scene. Yeah, so Venom shows up for a minute or so at a Mexican bar before being drawn back to his universe. However, a little piece of the symbiote gets left behind, which of course means Venom is finally part of the MCU. Now for real, the end. And that's all for today. This was most certainly one of the best Marvel movies made this year. Now tell me, what did you think about it? Did you expect Andrew and Toby to show up? Which scene did you like the most? Who was your favorite villain? Let me know your answers in the comment. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.